Okay, so get this. Today we're diving into heavy metals in infant formula. You want to know what's really in there, and you've given us three seriously intense research articles. We're talking those elements right on the periodic table, finding their way into, well, baby food. And I know what you're thinking metals are like everywhere, right? But when it comes to something as important as infant formula, it hits different, yeah.
It really does. We're talking about a primary source of nutrition for so many babies, especially those who, for whatever reason, aren't exclusively breastfed. And actually, that's a good place to start. The World Health Organization, they recommend breastfeeding for at least the first 6 months. It's got that unique blend of nutrients, antibodies. But we also know that just isn't possible for every parent, which is where formula steps in, a super important alternative.
Mhm.
And the good news is it's very regulated to make it as safe as possible.
Makes sense because when it comes to babies, safety is everything. So when scientists are looking at these metals in formula, what are they actually on the hunt for?
So not all metals are the enemy, right? Think of it like some friends are awesome in small doses. They bring something to the party. Too much time with them, though. Things go south. That's kind of like zinc and copper. They're essential nutrients. Babies need them for healthy development. We're talking cell growth, brain function, the whole shebang.
So balance is key, like most things in life, I guess.
Exactly. Just like you don't want to overdo it, even with your favorite friend. Even those good metals. Too much is no good, can actually become harmful. And then there are the metals that are, well, bad news bears. Lead, mercury, cadmium, no biological purpose, can be toxic even in small amounts.
Okay, so we've got our good guys, bad guys, but where are these metals even coming from in the first place?
That's $1 million question, and it's something we'll really dig into with the research you sent. But think. Environmental pollution, how things are farmed, even the way the formula is manufactured.
So it's like the whole journey of the formula, from farm to, well, bottle.
Exactly. And a big part of this research is figuring out how much of each metal is in different formulas and are those levels safe for those little ones. They use something called tolerable daily intakes, or TDIs, to figure out just how much is too much.
Okay, TDIs. Break that down for me. What's that mean in, like, plain English?
Imagine there's a safe daily limit for each metal, right? Like a speed limit, but for how much of that metal is okay each day. Scientists figure out what that speed limit is for babies, that's your TDI. And they're always checking, refining those TDIs as new research comes out.
So it's a moving target, kinda.
In a way, yeah. Science is always learning, right? As we learn more about these metals, those TDIs might get tweaked.
Makes sense. So it's not just, is it there? It's how much is there? Is it below the speed limit, those safe levels?
You got it. And in those studies you sent, you'll see there's a lot of variation in the metal levels in different formulas. And that's where it gets really interesting, right? Because we have to think about what that means for parents making choices for their little ones.
Okay, now I'm hooked. What did those studies actually find?
Remember those bad metals we talked about? One of those studies you sent over, formulas2.pdf, it really digs into those. A team of researchers over in Turkey, they took a close look at 72 different infant formula samples.
Wow, 72. Okay, so they weren't messing around. They were looking at a good amount there. What brands were they looking at?
16 popular brands. And they were looking at specifically the levels of lead, cadmium, and manganese.
Okay, getting into the nitty-gritty now. So what'd they find?
Well, some things were a little concerning. Like they found higher levels of lead in some of those starter formulas, the ones specifically for babies under 6 months, especially the formulas packaged in metal containers.
Metal containers.
Mm.
Interesting. So it's not just what's in the actual formula, but even how it's packaged. Man, the details matter.
They do. And it's important to understand, like, the why of these metals, right? Lead is especially bad for babies because, well, their brains, their nervous systems, they're still developing, so they're much more vulnerable. Even small amounts of lead at that age, it can have lasting impacts. We're talking cognitive development, overall health, the works.
Gosh, so those first few months are even more important to keep that lead exposure down. Makes you really want to double check everything. So anything else in that Turkish study stand out to you?
Yeah, a couple of things. One brand had pretty high levels of manganese, actually exceeding those safe daily limits we were talking about, the TDI.
Oh, wow. Exceeding the limits. Okay. Anything else?
Cadmium levels were too high in 2 samples, actually hit the maximum allowed by the European Union.
Okay, now that's setting off alarm bells for me.
Yeah,
But also makes me wonder, are these like one-off things or is this a bigger issue?
that's where that second study you sent, formulas3.pdf, it kind of widens the lens. It looks at metal levels in formulas globally. And this is interesting. Formulas from some places like Africa, Asia, and Europe generally had higher levels of these metals than the ones from here in the
Oh,
Americas.
wow. Okay, so it's not just brands, not just packaging even, but where these formulas are coming from plays a role too, huh? Why do you think there's such a difference between regions?
Probably a lot of things, right? Like pollution levels, how they farm things, even just like the specific way they make the formula can all be different in different places,
Hmm.
could all add up to those differences in the metal content.
Makes you realize how connected it all is.
Yeah.
Environment, factories, what's ending up in these little bottles. It's a lot. But before I go down a rabbit hole, let's talk about those specific metals. We know lead's bad news, especially for the little ones. What about cadmium and manganese? How risky are those?
Cadmium is a big one. It's a carcinogen, can cause cancer. And there's no safe level of exposure with a carcinogen, so even small amounts are a concern. Manganese is tricky because, like we said, our bodies need a little bit. But at higher levels, becomes neurotoxic. It can actually hurt the nervous system.
So not just maybe harmful, it's like actual proven links to health problems.
Right, and studies show too much manganese in infancy. It can lead to developmental delays, problems learning, even behavioral issues.
So we're talking serious stuff. And that Turkish study, like we said, found formulas exceeding those safe limits. That's got to be worrying for parents.
Of course, it's natural to worry, but gotta look at the whole picture. See, scientists, they have this tool. It's called the Target Hazard Quotient, or THQ for short.
Target hazard quotient. Okay, breaking it down, what is that?
It's how they figure out the actual risk from a certain level of, well, metal exposure.
Got it. So it's like, how much is there? How bad is that thing? All combined.
Exactly. Imagine this. You get a test back, right? You want to know if you passed. A THQ under 1, that's a passing grade, means the risk from that metal, low, score of 1 or higher, time to hit the books. Or in this case, maybe talk to your pediatrician.
Okay, so under 1, we're good. Above 1, maybe not so much. What were the scores for the Turkish formulas?
Here's the thing. Even though some of those samples were over the limit when they did the THQ calculations, everything was below 1.
Okay, so even though some were over the limits, overall risk was still considered low. That is reassuring.
Right.
But it's still kind of like rolling the dice, Like, maybe this batch of formula is fine, maybe the next has a bit more. Makes you think, what else is lurking in formula besides all these heavy metals?
You're asking all the right questions, and that's where that third source comes in. Doesn't have a catchy title or anything, but it's got a ton on other things that can end up in our food, including, infant formula.
Okay, so we're talking beyond heavy metals now.
Exactly. Things like chemical compounds that can form when the formula is heat treated, or even stuff from the packaging itself.
Okay, so this third source, no catchy title, but all about other stuff that can end up in formula.
Yeah.
It's like going from heavy metal to, I don't know, a whole different genre of music.
It really broadens the scope, right? We've been laser focused on heavy metals, but let's be real, there's a whole symphony of stuff that could be in our food.
Which, okay, kind of overwhelming if you think about it too much, but important. Parents just want to know they're making good choices for their kids. So, big picture, what are we supposed to do with all this info?
We definitely don't want anyone freaking out, right? Good news is most formulas you're going to find on the shelves. They're safe, they're tested, they have to meet strict standards.
Okay, that's good to hear at least.
It is. But, like we saw in the research, those individual batches, they can be different. And there's always that chance something slips through, which is why these studies are so important. They keep us on our toes, keep pushing for better safety.
Absolutely. So, for parents listening, those who rely on formula, what can they do? Besides, suddenly become scientists themselves.
Right. First things first, breastfeeding is always the best option, if it's possible. Like we talked about, breast milk, it's got that perfect combo of nutrients, antibodies. Can't really bottle that up, can you?
Nope, that's nature's recipe. But for those who can't, or choose not to, anything they can look for when they're buying formula.
For sure. Talk to your pediatrician, always a good first step. They
Yeah.
can give advice, especially tailored to your baby.
Makes sense. Beyond that, any tips for, like, savvy shoppers?
Definitely. Pay attention to how the formula is made. Some brands, they really prioritize quality control, making sure their ingredients are, top-notch.
Do your homework, basically.
Mm.
Read those labels, research the brands.
Exactly. Knowledge is power when it comes to this stuff. And remember, this isn't the end of the conversation. Science is always learning new things. Stay curious, keep asking questions, don't be afraid to really dig in.
Love it. And on that note, let's leave our listeners with something to think about. Beyond the metals, even beyond just formula, What does this tell us about, like, our whole food system? What can we do, all of us, to make sure the food we're giving our littlest humans is not just safe, but truly good for them?
That's the question, isn't it? The one I hope will keep this conversation going and lead to real change.
It certainly will. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been awesome unpacking all of this with you.
Learn more at mommyhood101.com.